Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want to tell you about a word most people never think about: custody. We use it for children, but the word was built for animals and property, for things that get counted, moved, and signed for. And that's the ugly little hinge this whole story turns on, because in almost every county in this country, a horse standing in a barn has more paperwork attached to it than a child sleeping in the same barn. A horse needs a health certificate to cross a state line. A horse needs a blood test on file, a brand inspection, a bill of sale, an owner of record. A kid can be handed off with a phone call and a form nobody reads. Today's story is about a father who understood both systems better than the people using them, because his actual job in the army was keeping working animals alive and keeping their records honest. He came home a week early. He found his daughter standing barefoot in a stall at 3 in the morning, and instead of doing the loud thing, he did the patient thing. Stay with me to the end, because the last stall in that barn had a padlock on the outside, and what was written on the inside of that door took 11 years to write. Ardin Tilden had spent 11 years learning that animals do not lie and paperwork does. He was 34, a sergeant first class in the Army's animal care program, a 68T, which is the long way of saying he ran a kennel of military working dogs and the veterinary paperwork that followed them across the world. He knew the weight of a healthy Belgian Malinois to the ounce. He knew what a dog's gums looked like 8 hours before anybody else could tell it was sick. Mostly he knew records, vaccination logs, transport manifests, health certificates, chain of custody on a single vial of blood. His whole professional life was built on one habit: write it down, date it, photograph it. Assume that one day a stranger will read this and decide something important. He came by it honestly. He'd grown up in Brickersford, Kentucky, the only son of Sylvan Tilden, a farrier who shoed horses across 4 counties out of the back of a Ford with a forge bolted in it. Ardin had held the hooves of maybe 2,000 horses before he was 17. He'd learned what a hungry animal looks like versus a lazy one, what a scared animal looks like versus a mean one, and how a barn that's run right smells different from a barn that's run cheap. His father used to say that you can tell everything about a family from the condition of their fence line and the condition of their children's shoes. Ardin had never forgotten it. Later, in a courtroom, a lawyer would ask him to explain that sentence to a jury, and the jury would not need it explained. He'd met Kayleen Ochiltree at a hay auction when they were both 22, and she'd been the funniest, quickest person in a barn full of slow talkers. She could add a column of numbers in her head faster than the auctioneer's clerk. She had a way of going very still when her mother's name came up, and Ardin had read that stillness as shyness for the better part of a decade, which was the single biggest mistake of his life. They had a daughter, Effie, 6 years old, with her mother's math brain and her father's stubborn chin. Effie loved 3 things without moderation: plastic horses, the word actually, and her boots. She wore those boots to bed if she wasn't caught. When Ardin deployed to a joint kennel operation in Jordan that January, Effie sent him a video every Sunday, and in every video the boots were somewhere in frame, kicked over by the door like 2 little sentries. Kayleen moved back out to her mother's place while he was gone. 300 acres on the north side of Vachel County, a white farmhouse, 4 barns, an equine rescue with a website, and a yard light on a 40-foot pole that burned a strange green-white all night long. Everyone called the matriarch Mama Rilla. Rilla Ochiltree was 71, 5'1", and had buried a husband, 2 mortgages, and any part of herself that could be argued with. She ran a program out of that farm called Bright Acres Fellowship, and a rescue called Second Wind, and she was the most respected woman in 3 townships. She'd been on the county fair board for 20 years. She'd stood up at more funerals than the preacher. Ardin had never liked her, and had never been able to point to a reason he could say out loud. She was kind in public, in a way that had a schedule to it. She talked about children like inventory that could be improved, and there was a thing she did when a child cried in her kitchen. She didn't look at the child, she looked at the clock. The Sunday videos changed in February. Effie's face got thinner in a way you only see if you know a face. The background changed too, from the yellow lamp of Kayleen's old bedroom to a hallway with that green-white light bleeding through a window behind her. Twice, Effie started to say something and looked off camera first. Once, Kayleen answered a question Ardin had asked his daughter. Once, Effie said goodnight and rubbed her wrist, and Ardin watched that 10-second clip 40 times on a cot in Jordan and told himself it was a mosquito bite. In March, his unit's rotation was moved up 8 days on a scheduling shuffle nobody explained. Ardin didn't tell anyone at home. He wanted to walk in and see his daughter's face do the thing faces do. He flew Amon to Frankfurt to Atlanta to Louisville, drove a rental south with the window down because the heater smelled like pennies, and turned onto his own road at 11 minutes after 1 in the morning on the last Thursday in March, with a stuffed horse in a gift bag on the passenger seat, and no idea he was already too late to be gentle about anything. The house was dark except for the range hood light over the stove, which was how Kayleen had always left it. Ardin let himself in and stood in his own kitchen and let the smell of the place hit him, and for about 90 seconds he was the happiest man in Kentucky. Then he went down the hall to Effie's room and turned on the lamp. The bed was made. Not made the way a 6-year-old makes a bed. Made the way a hotel makes a bed. Hospital corners, the quilt squared, the pillow centered, the 4 plastic horses lined up on the shelf in a row by height, with their heads all facing the same way. Ardin stood there with his duffel still on his shoulder, and his stomach went cold before his brain caught up, because Effie had never once in her life lined anything up. Effie's room looked like a photograph of a room. He checked the closet out of habit and found the second wrong thing. Effie's coat was on the hook. Her good winter coat, the purple one with the reflective strip he'd bought her because she liked to walk the fence line at dusk. And under it, by the door, both boots, standing upright, side by side. Ardin went and stood in the doorway of his own bedroom and said his wife's name twice before she woke. Kayleen sat up fast, and the first thing out of her mouth was not his name. It was, "Why are you here?" He said, "Where's Effie?" She rubbed her face. She was very awake, very quickly, for a woman who had been asleep. "She's at Mom's. She stays out there most nights now. It's easier with the school bus. The bus comes past this house." The route changed. She left her coat. "She's got coats out there, Ardin. She's got a whole room out there." Kayleen swung her legs off the bed and reached for the lamp and didn't turn it on. "It's 1 in the morning. Come to bed and we'll go get her at 7. There are moments where a man decides what kind of man he is going to be for the rest of his life, and they never look dramatic from the outside. Ardin looked at his wife sitting on the edge of a bed in the dark, not turning on the lamp, and he understood that he was being handled. He'd spent 11 years reading animals that couldn't speak. He knew what it looks like when a creature is managing a threat instead of answering a question. He said, "Okay," and he took his keys off the counter and walked out. The Ochiltree place was 19 minutes north. He drove it in 14. The road out there runs between 2 lines of black locust, and at 3 in the morning in March the fog sits in the low spots like spilled milk. He came over the last rise and saw the yard light before he saw the farm, that green-white mercury glare on the pole, throwing a circle of dead-looking light over the gravel lot, the equipment shed, the 4 barns. He didn't pull into the drive. He parked on the county easement at the fence corner, out of the light, and walked in, and later that decision would matter more than anything else he did that year, because it meant nobody heard a truck. The house was dark. The nearest barn was not. There was a bulb burning in the aisle of the long barn on the north side, the old one with the sagging ridge line, and the sliding door was open about 2 feet. It was 36 degrees. He remembers that number because there was a thermometer nailed to the barn post, one of those seed company giveaways, and he looked at it on his way past without meaning to, and his brain filed it the way his brain filed everything. The aisle ran 40 feet with stalls down the right-hand side. It smelled like ammonia and old hay, and something underneath that Ardin's whole childhood recognized as a barn that isn't mucked on any schedule. He walked past stall 1, empty. Stall 2, a sway-backed bay gelding that didn't lift its head. Stall 3, empty, the door hanging. Stall 4 had his daughter in it. Effie was standing in the middle of the stall with her back to the door, in a nightgown and a horse blanket around her shoulders, her hair tangled up on one side from a pillow. She had no shoes on. Her feet were bare on the packed dirt and straw, gray with dirt to the ankle, and she was standing, not sitting, not lying down, standing, in the middle of a stall at 3 in the morning, like a person who had been told where to stand. Ardin did not shout. He said, very quietly, "Effie." She turned around. She looked at him for a second and a half without any expression at all, which is the part he still can't talk about. And then her face came apart and she ran at the door. He got the latch open and picked her up, and she was so light that he actually adjusted his stance, the way you do when you lift a bag you expected to be heavier. Her feet were cold as creek stones. He put his hand flat on the soles of them and could feel that they were past cold, into that waxy hard cold that his medical training had a word for. "Baby, why are you out here?" And Effie said, into his neck, in a voice that was not upset, which was the worst part, a voice that was explaining something obvious to a slow adult. "Grandma says, animals sleep with animals." Ardin stood in that aisle with his daughter's cold feet in his hand, and he felt something move in his chest that was not rage yet. Rage is loud. This was the other thing, the quiet one, the one that makes lists. He said, "Who else is out here?" Effie didn't answer that. She lifted her head off his shoulder and looked down the aisle, past stall 5 and 6, to the far end, where the last stall sat in the corner, with the light not quite reaching it. And Ardin saw what she was looking at. That stall door was not like the others. Somebody had screwed a steel hasp onto the outside of it, the kind you'd use on a feed room, and there was a padlock through the hasp. You do not lock a horse in from the outside. A horse can't work a latch. The latch is for a thing with hands. Effie put her mouth right against his ear, and she whispered it. "Daddy, don't open the last stall." He took 4 steps toward it anyway, because he is who he is. And from inside that stall, something moved. Not the heavy shift of an animal lying down. A short, dry, human cough, and then the sound of somebody trying very hard not to cough again. Ardin stopped in the middle of the aisle with his daughter in his arms and did the hardest thing he had ever done, which was arithmetic. He had a 6-year-old with hypothermic feet in his hands, no weapon, no phone signal in that hollow, 4 barns of people who lived here, a locked door with somebody behind it, and no photograph of any of it. He turned around and walked out of the barn and did not look back, and he counted his steps to the fence corner, and at the gate he stopped, set Effie on the top rail with the blanket around her, took out his phone with no bars on it, and photographed the barn, the open door, the thermometer, the yard light, the drive, the gate, and the fence corner, with the timestamp running, because his father's son and the Army's animal man both knew the same thing. A story is just noise. A record is a weapon. The light hit him when he was putting Effie in the truck. Zebulon Ochiltree crossed the lot with a 5-cell flashlight in one hand and a shotgun broken open over his left forearm, which is a thing countrymen do to tell you the gun isn't the point, while making sure you know there's a gun. Zeb was Kayleen's older brother, 41, built like a fence post that had been driven in crooked, and he hauled livestock for a living in a gooseneck trailer with a hand-painted name on the side. "That's my mother's property," Zeb said. "That's my daughter," Ardin said, and shut the truck door. Mama Rilla came out of the dark behind him without a light at all, in a quilted housecoat and unlaced barn boots, hair in a night braid, entirely calm, the way people are calm when they have never once been made to explain themselves. "Ardin," she said, warm as a church basement. "We didn't know you were home." "No," he said, "you didn't. That child asked to sleep out with the horses. She's been asking all winter. She was standing up, Rilla, in a stall, with no shoes, at 36 degrees. Well now, she takes her shoes off." Rilla smiled at him with real fondness, and that was the moment Ardin understood he was not dealing with a person who was going to slip. Children are animals until you teach them not to be. That's not cruelty. That's the oldest lesson there is. You spent your whole life around stock. You know what happens to an animal that never learns where it belongs. Ardin said, "What's in the last stall?" Nobody moved for about 2 seconds. Then Zeb laughed, 1 syllable, and said, "Sermon." "Whose sermon?" "Stud horse. Mean as a snake. That's why he's padlocked. Genius. So somebody's kid don't wander in and get killed." And Ardin, who had held 2,000 hooves, said, "Padlocks on the outside. That's what outside means. A horse can't open a stall door from the inside, Zeb. You don't lock a horse in. You lock a horse out." He let it sit there in the green light. "Who's the lock for?" Rilla put her hand on her son's arm, gentle, and said, "Take your daughter home, Ardin. You've had a long flight, and you're not seeing straight. We'll all talk in the morning when everybody's kind again." He drove out slow, and in the mirror he watched the two of them standing under that pole light, not talking, both facing the barn. Effie fell asleep before the county line. He drove her to the emergency room in Callaway rather than home, and at 4:50 in the morning, a physician's assistant named Olita Kinsolving warmed his daughter's feet in a basin and wrote down the words that would eventually appear on page 11 of a federal indictment: superficial frost nip, both feet, bilateral, body weight below 3rd percentile for age, lice, lichenified calluses on both palms and the pads of all 10 fingers, consistent with repetitive manual labor, unusual in a patient of this age. She said the last part to Ardin twice, and the second time she said it, she wasn't looking at the chart. He called the sheriff's office from the ER hallway. A deputy took the report over the phone in a bored monotone. 2 hours later, Sheriff Lemuel Bexley himself came out to the hospital, a big soft man with a good handshake, and told Ardin that he'd known Rilla Ochiltree since Little League, that she had raised half the county's problem kids, and that a soldier coming home to a marriage in trouble sometimes sees things through a certain lens. The report Bexley eventually filed said that a minor child had been playing in an outbuilding and that the responding agency found no evidence of neglect. Ardin read that sentence 11 times in a parking lot. When Bexley walked away, a deputy who'd been standing by the doors the whole time came over. She was maybe 30, sunburned across the nose. Name tape said Z. Norwood. She looked at the sheriff's back for a second, and then she took a card out of her shirt pocket, and she wrote something on it, and handed it to Ardin and said only, "You didn't get this from me, and don't call the office line." He looked at it in the truck. On the front, her cell number. On the back, in ballpoint, 3 words and a number. State Brand Inspector, and a name, Stuart Galloway. He didn't understand it yet. He put it in his wallet behind his ID card. Kayleen was sitting on the front steps when he got home with their daughter asleep across his shoulder. She stood up and reached for Effie, and Ardin turned his body. Just slightly. Just enough. And his wife stopped with her hands out. "You knew," he said. "It's not what you think." Kayleen. She had frostnip. She has calluses on her hands like a farrier's apprentice. She's 6. He kept his voice down because of the kid on his shoulder. And later he'd realize that's why he never once yelled through that whole spring, and why every single person who tried to paint him as unstable failed. How long? Kayleen's mouth moved before any sound came out of it. And then she said the thing that ended their marriage more completely than any of the crimes did. She said, "It's 4 nights a week. It's not every night." Ardin carried his daughter inside, put her in her own bed, sat on the floor with his back against the door until the sun came up, and made his list. Item 1. Get the child out and keep her out. Item 2. Find out who coughed. Item 3. Do not do one single thing that a lawyer can call revenge. You cannot interview a 6-year-old. Ardin knew that much from 100 hours of training on evidence handling. Ask a child a leading question and you have not learned anything. You have destroyed something. So for 4 days he did not ask his daughter a single question about the barn. He made pancakes. He put her boots by the bed where she could see them. He sat on the floor and let her stack plastic horses on his knee. And he waited, the way he'd waited out 100 frightened dogs in 100 kennels, sitting sideways, not looking straight on, letting the animal decide when the human was safe. On the 4th night she told him about the barn kids. There were 4 of them, she said, and she named them like classmates. Jonas, who was big and coughed. Tessie, who braided her hair and once gave her half a granola bar. Shep, who was funny. And a boy she only called New Boy, who cried the first 3 nights and then stopped. They slept in the barn every night, all the time, not just 4 nights a week like her. They got up when it was still dark. They fed and mucked and hauled, and then a truck came at the top of the lane and they got in it. Where's the truck go? Effie shrugged with her whole body, the way kids do. Work. What did you do out there, baby? Water buckets, she said, pleased with herself. I can carry one now. Tessie said you have to carry it on the side of your leg so it doesn't hit your knee. Who told you to sleep in the barn? She got very interested in the horses on his knee. And then she said, "I told Miss Nova about the cat." That was how Ardin learned there had already been a caseworker. Nova Jessup was 38, drove a state sedan with 190,000 miles on it, carried a caseload of 71 children, and had been out to the Ochiltree farm twice in 14 months. She met Ardin in a Waffle House because, she said, she wasn't allowed to talk to him, and she was going to talk to him anyway. She laid it out with the flat voice of someone who has stopped being surprised. Bright Acres Fellowship was not a foster home, and did not pretend to be. It was registered as a private faith-based agricultural fellowship, which in that state was a category with almost nothing in it, and it took placements 3 ways. Some kids came through informal kinship arrangements signed on a kitchen table. Some came from families in 3 counties who paid Rilla Ochiltree a monthly fee to straighten out a difficult teenager. And some came through a regional placement contract for court-diverted youth, which paid the program a per-child, per-day stipend of $94. $94 a day, Ardin said. Per child, per day. How many kids? On paper right now, 6. Nova stirred her coffee and didn't drink it. I have been told by 2 supervisors and 1 county attorney that Bright Acres is a faith program with an agricultural component, and that a home study requires notice, and that a program inspection requires notice, and that the notice period is 72 hours. 72 hours, Ardin repeated. You could hide a circus in 72 hours. He asked her what happened both times she went out. She said the same thing happened both times. The house was clean. The kitchen smelled like bread. There were 6 beds made up in a bunk room in the finished half of the equipment shed, with quilts and a Bible on each pillow and a laminated chore chart on the wall. The kids sat in a row and answered like a choir. She wrote down that she had concerns and no findings, which she said is the sentence that ends more of these than anything else in the language. And the barn? Ardin asked. I don't have authority over a barn, Nova said. I have authority over a residence. The barn isn't a residence. On paper, nobody lives there. Ardin sat back in the booth and felt the whole shape of it for the first time. It wasn't that nobody could get onto that farm. It was that everybody who could get onto that farm had to knock 3 days early, and the only door that opened without knocking belonged to a system nobody thought about. He said, Miss Jessup, do you know what a Coggins test is? She said, no. It's a blood test for equine infectious anemia. Every horse in this state has to have one on file to be sold, hauled, shown, or boarded. It expires every 12 months. It has to be tied to a specific animal with a specific description, markings, whorls, scars, and the state has an inspector whose whole job is checking that the animal in the trailer is the animal on the paper. Nova looked at him. They've got a rescue out there, Ardin said. They've got sponsors online paying monthly for named horses. Rescue means intake. Intake means transport. Transport means paper. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, which is a thing he did when the ground under an idea felt solid. Nobody guards the animal door. Everybody guards the child door. That night, he did the first honest work of the case. He sat at his father's kitchen table with a laptop and pulled up Second Wind Equine Rescue, and he read every page of it the way he'd read a transport manifest. There were 19 horses on the sponsor page. Nice photos, good copy, a story for each one. Sponsor Clabber, an elderly gelding who pulled a plow for 20 years, $25 a month, and you get a quarterly photo update. Sponsor Biscuit, rescued from a kill pen in Ohio, $40 a month. Sponsor Sermon, a stallion too dangerous to rehome, $75 a month, and thank you for supporting his lifetime sanctuary care. Ardin zoomed in on Clabber's quarterly photo update from that January. Then he opened the update from 2 Octobers before it and enlarged the fence line in the background and looked at the shadow and looked at the same 3 burdock heads in the same place on the same post. It was the same photograph. They'd cropped it 2 different ways. He printed both, wrote the date and time on each in pen, initialed them, put them in a folder, and started a log, page 1, line 1, the way he had started 10,000 logs. Then he drove out to the county easement at the fence corner in the dark with a fence post driver and a game camera, and put a trail camera on public right-of-way pointed at nothing but a gate and a lane. Legal, boring, time-stamped. It took 11 days to prove that 4 children got into a white flatbed truck at 4:50 in the morning, every morning, including Sunday. To understand Rilla Ochiltree, you have to understand the winter of the year her husband died. Otho Ochiltree had been a good farmer and a bad businessman, which is the most common combination in that part of the country. He'd bought 200 more acres in a wet year and made the payments in dry ones. And when his heart stopped in the seat of a tractor at 63, he left his widow 300 acres, $190,000 of operating debt, and a note at the bank with 90 days on it. Rilla was 49. She had 2 grown children, a church, and a reputation. What she did that winter was the smartest thing anyone in Vachel County ever did, and it was also the beginning of every terrible thing that came after. She went to the county and asked for a boy. A neighbor's son, 16, had been picked up twice and was headed to the youth facility in Ellisville. Rilla stood up in a hearing in a wool coat and said she'd take him, that idle hands were the whole problem, that a farm would give him a shape to grow into. The judge nearly cried. The boy came out in February, and by April he was up at 4:30 every morning, and by June the farm was making its own hay for the first time in 9 years, and Rilla Ochiltree made her note at the bank. Then she got a letter from the state saying that as a placement provider she was owed a per diem, retroactive, with a check attached. She had solved a labor problem, and the state had paid her for the privilege. It took 11 years to become what Ardin found. It grew the way a bad thing grows, which is one reasonable step at a time. 2 boys, then 4. A bunk room built in the equipment shed for the inspections. Then the discovery that a private family would pay $800 a month for the same service the state paid $2,800 for. Then the discovery that a neighbor with 200 acres of tobacco would pay the farm $12 an hour, cash, for a crew of 4 that showed up at 5 in the morning and never complained, because you cannot complain to a man who is not paying you. Yancey Ulmer, who farmed the ground on the other side of the creek, paid Bright Acres just under $31,000 over 4 years and told himself he was helping. Then came the horses, which were pure genius. Second Wind Equine Rescue was formed as a non-profit with Rilla's pastor, Ira Zabel, as the second board member. Rescue horses gave the farm a public face, a reason for strangers to see kids working in a field and think mercy instead of arithmetic. It gave them a donation stream from people 2,000 miles away who would never drive up that lane. And it gave them a category. A horse operation is agricultural. Agricultural means the barns are barns and not buildings anybody lives in. And it means the fellowship's kids are learning a trade. And it means every single inspection anybody ever threatened them with was the wrong inspection. There was one more thing, and it was the thing that turned a scheme into a horror. Rilla genuinely believed it. She believed that children were animals until they were taught otherwise, that comfort makes a person soft, and cold makes a person useful, and that the barn was not a punishment but a curriculum. She said it in her own words on a recorded call, eventually, and the jury heard it. I never put a child anywhere I wouldn't put a good horse. Ardin called the number on the back of Deputy Norwood's card on a Tuesday. Stuart Galloway had been a state brand and livestock inspector for 26 years and answered his phone like a man who did not get many calls. He was 60, deaf in one ear from a lifetime of squeeze chutes, and had the specific patience of a person whose entire job is comparing a document to an animal. Ardin drove to Frankfurt and put his folder on the man's desk, and it took Galloway 90 seconds to stop being polite and start being interested. Your sponsor page has 19 horses on it, Galloway said. Yes, sir. How many of those has anybody laid eyes on? I count 4 in the last 2 years of photographs. The rest are recycled images. Ardin turned a page. This one, Clabber. Sponsors pay $25 a month. There are 61 sponsors on Clabber. Galloway put his glasses on and did what inspectors do, which is not get excited. He pulled the state's own records. A horse doesn't just exist in a rescue's marketing. It exists in Coggins tests, in health certificates for interstate travel, in brand inspection certificates when it changes hands, in the auction's sale barn records with a back tag number. Clabber, an aged draft cross gelding, had a Coggins on file dated 3 years prior and nothing after it. He had a brand inspection certificate from a sale barn in southern Ohio. which meant that a horse the sponsors were still paying for had been sold, and Galloway could see the buyer's number, and the buyer's number belonged to a man who bought for a slaughter contractor in Texas. He found the same shape on 11 of the 19. They're selling the horses out the back and selling the story out the front, Galloway said. How much is that? Ardin asked. That's wire fraud, son, and that's a federal word. Galloway took his glasses off. But here's what you came for, and I suspect you already know it, because you've got that look. You want to know what I can do that nobody else can do. Yes, sir. I can inspect any premises in this state where livestock are held for sale or transport. I don't need 72 hours. I don't need a warrant to look at an animal and a paper. If I have reason to believe a horse is being moved without a valid health certificate, I can stop the trailer on the road at 3 in the morning, and when the paper doesn't match the horse, I can walk the property it came off of, and I can bring anybody I want with me for safety. Ardin sat very still. You understand what I just told you, Galloway said. You told me there's a door. I told you there's a door, and it's been standing open the whole time, because everybody in this state is so busy guarding the front of that house that not one soul is watching the loading chute. Galloway wrote something on a legal pad. Now, are they hauling? 2-3 times a month. Then all we need, said Stuart Galloway, is a reason for them to haul on a night of our choosing. The Ochiltrees found out he was asking questions in the second week of April, and they came at him the way that kind of family always comes at a man, from 3 sides at once, none of them the front. First the tires, both driver's side, sidewalls cut, in his father's driveway. Second, a barn cat on his porch with its neck wrung, laid out neat on the mat, which is a message with a grammar to it. Third, and much cleverer, a letter arrived at Ardin's unit. It was 2 pages, unsigned, alleging that Sergeant First Class Tilden had returned from deployment in an unstable condition, had been drinking, had trespassed on his mother-in-law's farm at 3 in the morning, had frightened an elderly woman, and had removed a child from lawful care. It included a copy of Sheriff Bexley's report, the one with the sentence about a minor child playing in an outbuilding. That letter came within 3 weeks of a promotion board. First Sergeant Quinton Dunbar called Ardin into an office and put the letter on the desk face up and said, "Talk." Ardin talked for 40 minutes and put down a folder while he did it. Photographs with timestamps. The hospital record from Callaway. 11 days of trail camera stills of 4 miners boarding a flatbed at 4:50 in the morning. 2 cropped versions of the same picture of the same horse. A log, numbered, dated, initialed. Dunbar looked at the log the longest. You know what this is, he said finally, tapping the letter. This is somebody who's used to people flinching. Yes, First Sergeant. You're not going to flinch. No, First Sergeant. Dunbar leaned back. Then I'm going to do the one useful thing a First Sergeant can do, which is make sure the Army is boring about this while you work. He signed the leave extension himself and wrote a memorandum for record that was so dry and so complete that when a county attorney later tried to characterize Ardin as an unstable veteran with a grudge, the defense of that characterization died in a single paragraph. The harder collapse happened at his own kitchen table. Kayleen came over on a Sunday and sat across from him and told him about being 9 years old. She said it flat, like reading a grocery list, because that's how people tell you the thing they've never told anyone. She said she'd been put in the barn for the first time the winter she was 9, for lying about a broken jar. 2 nights. She said by 11 she could sleep out there without crying. She said her mother's phrase for it was earning your bed, and that when you'd earned it back you got a hot bath and cinnamon toast, and your mother's whole face turned toward you like a lamp coming on, and that the toast was the part she still couldn't think about. So you knew exactly what it was, Ardin said. I knew it wasn't the worst thing. Kayleen, that's the sentence. That right there is the whole sickness. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. You didn't hand her over because you're a monster. You handed her over because somebody taught you that this is the low end of normal, and you never once got to stand outside of it and look. Kayleen said, I told myself 4 nights was a compromise. You negotiated, with your mother, over your daughter. He put his hands flat on the table. I need you to hear the next part. I am not going to fight you for custody. I'm going to tell the truth in a courtroom and let the truth do it. She cried then, and he let her. and he did not comfort her, and both of those were mercies of a kind. The last piece he needed came from a feed store in Callaway, off the mouth of a 22-year-old man named Quade Harkin, who wore a knee brace and stocked mineral blocks and had aged out of Bright Acres Fellowship 4 years earlier. Quade agreed to meet him behind the store on a loading dock. He talked for 2 hours with his hat off, turning it in his hands. He told Ardin the rules of the barn. You get up at 4:30. You do the farm before the truck. If you're on the crew, you work till dark and you eat in the truck. You do not talk to the neighbor's people. You never, ever talk to a person with a lanyard. He explained the notice. When the state called, they had 3 days, and there was a whole choreography to it. Quilts on the bunk beds, Bibles on the pillows, the chore chart. The kids drilled on their answers in the kitchen, with Pastor Zabel timing them like a fire drill. And he told him about the last stall. That's the quiet stall, Quade said. That's where you go when somebody's coming and you can't be seen. If you're bruised up, or you're sick, or you're new, and you ain't been broke to it yet. He turned the hat over. You're in there for the 72 hours. Water, and a bucket, and a blanket. How many times were you in there? Twice. How old were you? 13 and 14. Ardin made himself ask the next question in a level voice. Quade, is somebody in there now? Quade looked at the gravel for a long time. Jonas Quillen's been out there since Christmas is what I hear. He's the one who won't say the answers right. He put his hat back on. There was a boy named Ellis in my year. Coughed all one January. They said he ran off. Nobody ever come around asking. That's the part nobody believes when I say it out loud, mister. Nobody come around asking. That's the whole trick of it. They pick kids that nobody comes around asking about. Ardin drove home and sat in the driveway with the engine off for a long time. Then he went inside, opened the log, and wrote line 91. Subject, minor male, approx 15, name Jonas Quillen. Location, North Barn, end stall, hasp and padlock, exterior. Condition unknown. Audible cough, 0311 hours, 27 March. And underneath it, because his father had taught him that a man should write down what he intends and then be judged by it, he wrote, Get him out first. Everything else is second. There were 4 doors into that farm, and 3 of them were nailed shut. The child welfare door required 72 hours of notice. The criminal door required Sheriff Lemuel Bexley, who had known Rilla since Little League. The civil door required money and 2 years, and Jonas Quillen did not have 2 years, because a 15-year-old with a January cough that is still going in April is not a kid with a cold. The 4th door was a loading chute. They built the plan in the back room of a law office in Callaway over 9 days, and there were 6 people in that room. Ardin, Stuart Galloway, brand and livestock inspector, Reva Lindquist, a family attorney who had spent 4 years handling agricultural estates and knew exactly which words in the state code had teeth, Nova Jessup from the state, sitting there on her own time, in violation of about 4 policies, Deputy Zadie Norwood, off-duty, out of uniform, and, on a speakerphone from Louisville, a United States postal inspector named Aveline Ransom, who had gotten interested the moment Ardin used the phrase 61 monthly donors on a horse that was sold to a kill buyer, because donations that cross state lines by card and by mail are, in her jurisdiction, a very specific kind of crime. Lindquist ran it like a checklist. First, she said, nobody in this room touches that property. Not one of us. If Sergeant Tilden sets foot on that farm, every single thing we find becomes a story about an angry son-in-law, and I will spend 3 years watching a defense attorney tell that story. Ardin said, Understood. I need to hear you say it a different way. I will be at the fence corner on the county easement, Ardin said, and I will not cross the gate, no matter what I hear. That was the hardest promise he ever made, and he kept it for 11 minutes, which turned out to be exactly long enough. Second, Lindquist said, we do not manufacture a crime. That's entrapment, and it's also cheating. We give them an ordinary opportunity to do the thing they already do twice a month, on a night when Inspector Galloway happens to be working the state line. The opportunity was Quade Harkin. They put it together in the plainest way possible. Quade called the rescue's number as himself, a young man with a little money from a settlement, wanting a big quiet gelding for his mother's place, plus one more, and he mentioned that he'd pay cash and that he was leaving for Ohio Friday night because his cousin had a truck free. Rilla Ochiltree's own recorded voice on the rescue's line said the words that hung her. "We can load Friday, and we'll get you papers in the mail after. Don't you worry about papers. You do not haul a horse across a state line without a health certificate signed by a veterinarian within 30 days. Everybody in the horse business knows it. Rilla knew it. She'd been doing it for 11 years because nobody had ever once checked a trailer coming off her lane. Third, Lindquist said, the child piece has to be ready to move the second the premises inspection begins, or we find him and lose him. That was Nova Jessup's part, and she had done a thing that took real nerve. She'd gone over 3 supervisors and filed for an emergency order on the basis of the ER record, the trail camera stills, and 1 page from the state's own contract file that showed 11 prior reports on that address over 9 years. Every one of them closed with the same 6 words. Concerns noted, no findings, case closed. 11 reports. Ardin read that page and had to go stand outside. The order was signed by a judge 2 counties over on a Thursday afternoon, sealed, and it authorized removal of any minor found on the premises. It did not authorize entry. It didn't have to. It only had to be in Nova Jessup's hand, at the moment somebody else's lawful authority opened the door. Fourth, said Aveline Ransom from the speakerphone, nobody says the word federal to anybody until Monday. If they hear it, the horses go, the kids go, and the laptop goes in a burn barrel. They said it for Friday, the 2nd of May. There were 2 more pieces Ardin added himself, and they were both the kind of thing only a man who had spent his life around animals and their paperwork would think of. The first was the veterinarian. Dr. Farah Nasser ran a large animal practice out of a truck and had, without knowing it, been the vet of record on exactly 1 Coggins test out of the 11 second wind claimed. She agreed to be on the roadside Friday night because the fastest way to prove a certificate is fake is to have the veterinarian whose signature is on it standing in the ditch reading it. The second was smaller, and it was the one that broke Rilla Ochiltree in front of a jury 11 months later. Ardin knew that every horse in that barn had a nameplate on the stall. He'd seen them the night he carried Effie out. Brass plates on the doors, the kind you order 12 at a time. He also knew that the sponsor page named 19 horses, so he asked Galloway to do one thing during the premises walk, over and above the inspection. Photograph every stall plate in every barn, in order, with the stall empty or not. Because 11 of those horses were dead or sold to Texas, and their brass plates were still screwed to the doors of empty stalls, being photographed 4 times a year with a fresh flake of hay thrown in, for people in Oregon and Massachusetts and Vermont who were paying $25 a month and getting a quarterly picture of a promise. On the Thursday night before, Ardin sat on the edge of Effie's bed, and she asked him where he was going in the morning. He said, to stand by a fence. She said, is Jonas coming? And Ardin said, that's the plan, baby. And she said, he likes toast, and rolled over and went to sleep. And her father sat there in the dark and understood that the 6-year-old had been keeping a list too. Zebulon Ochiltree pulled his gooseneck onto the 4-lane at 11:52 on Friday night, with 2 horses in it and a folder of papers on the dash, and 11 miles later, at the way station south of the river, a state brand and livestock inspector in a reflective vest waved him into the lot. Galloway did it exactly the way he'd done it 10,000 times, which is to say, slowly. He walked the trailer. He looked at the 2 animals. He asked for the health certificates and the Coggins, and Zeb handed over 3 sheets of paper, and Galloway read them under a flashlight with his glasses down his nose, and then he did the thing that ends these nights. He walked around to the ditch side of the road and said, Doc, come look at your signature. Dr. Farah Nasser stepped up into the light in a barn coat, took the paper, held it about 8 inches from her face, and said, that's not my hand, that's not my license number, and I have never in my life examined a horse named Biscuit. At 12:31 a.m., a state trooper arrested Zeb Ochiltree on the shoulder of the highway for forgery of an official veterinary document and transporting equine without a valid health certificate, which sounds like the smallest crime in this whole story and was the only one that mattered because it gave Stuart Galloway statutory reason to inspect the premises of origin. The convoy came up the Ochiltree Lane at 11 minutes after 5 in the morning. Ardin heard it from the fence corner. He'd been there since 3, sitting on the hood of his truck on the county easement in the cold, with his phone in his hand and his boots on the bumper, and he watched the headlights come off the blacktop and swing up the lane one after another. The state truck with the inspector's shield, 2 state police cruisers, Deputy Norwood's personal car, a state sedan with 190,000 miles on it, and Nova Jessup driving, an ambulance, staged because Ardin had insisted on the ambulance and nobody had argued. The yard light was still burning green over the lot when they rolled under it. Rilla Ochiltree came out on the porch in her housecoat with her hair in a night braid and got as far as, "You'd better have a warrant," before Galloway held up a laminated card and said, "Ma'am, I don't need one. I need to see your loading records and every animal on this property," and walked past her toward the barns with a flashlight, and Rilla Ochiltree stood on her own porch and watched a man in a state windbreaker open the door of her north barn, and for the first time in 11 years, her face did something. They went stall by stall. Galloway photographed each brass plate the way he'd been asked. Clabber's plate on an empty stall with fresh hay in the corner. Biscuit's plate. 9 more plates on 9 more empty stalls, all of them with a flake of hay thrown in like a set dressed for a picture. Then the aisle bent left at the end, and there was a door with a steel hasp screwed to the outside of it, and a padlock through the hasp. Deputy Norwood cut it. The stall was 8 feet by 10. There was a horse blanket on a layer of straw, a 5-gallon bucket of water with ice skimmed on it, another bucket that was not for water, and a boy. Jonas Quillen was 15 years old and weighed 94 pounds. He'd been in that stall since the 21st of December. He had pneumonia in the lower lobe of his right lung, and when the light came in, he sat up on his elbow and did the thing that made a state trooper with 19 years on the job walk back out to the aisle and stand with his hand over his mouth. He apologized. He said he was sorry, that he'd be ready in a minute. Nova Jessup went in first, because a caseworker with an emergency order should always be the first face, and she sat down in the straw in her work clothes and said, "Jonas, my name is Nova. Nobody here works for her. We're taking you out of here right now, and you don't have to walk if you don't want to." He walked. He got about 6 feet and stopped, and he turned around and went back, and everybody let him, because nobody knew what he was doing. He put his hand into a gap between 2 boards on the back wall and pulled out a bread bag with a rubber band around it. Inside the bag was a composition notebook, the 99-cent kind, filled front to back in pencil. Jonas Quillen had kept a log, every day since the previous February. The date, the time they got up, who was on the crew, which farm the truck went to, how many hours, what they were given to eat, which kids got put in the quiet stall and for how long, when the state called, and what they were told to say, drilled and dated, in a 15-year-old's handwriting, with the phrase "they made us practice," written out 4 separate times. The last entry was from that Tuesday. It said, "Truck came 4:50. Not me, I'm still in. Tessie carried water for me. If somebody reads this, my name is Jonas Quillen and I am not a runaway." Ardin Tilden, who had built his entire life on the belief that a record is a weapon, would later say that finding that notebook was the only time in the whole business that he had to sit down. And there was one more thing in that stall, and it was the thing that made the front page. On the inside of the door, and on the boards of the back wall, low down where a person sitting on the floor could reach, there were names, scratched into the wood with a nail or a bit of wire or a rock, layered over each other, some fresh and some worn nearly smooth, by 11 years of shoulders and blankets. State police photographed and cataloged every one of them, 41 names. One of them was a boy named Ellis Rand, who Rilla Ochiltree had reported to no one, and who a sheriff's file listed as a runaway in a report of 11 lines. Sheriff Lemuel Bexley arrived at 5:41 a.m. and made it about 9 feet inside the gate before a state police lieutenant told him, in a very level voice, that this was a state agricultural inspection with a concurrent federal interest, and that he should return to his vehicle. Bexley stood in the lot for a moment under the green light with his hands on his belt, and then he did the only smart thing he had done in 11 years, which was nothing. They arrested Rilla Ochiltree at 6:04 in the morning in her own kitchen, where the bread was already rising in a bowl on the counter under a towel for the inspection she thought was coming Monday. Out at the fence corner, Ardin was still on the hood of his truck when the ambulance came back down the lane and stopped level with the gate, and the back doors opened, and Nova Jessup leaned out and said 4 words to him. He wants to know if the man who heard him is real. Ardin Tilden got off the hood and walked up to the ambulance doors, and did not cross the property line, because he'd promised. He stood on the county road with his hands at his sides and said, "I'm real. I heard you in March. I'm sorry it took till May." And Jonas Quillen, 94 pounds, on a gurney, with an oxygen line under his nose, said, "You came back." The case took 14 months, and it did not go the way anybody in Vachel County expected, because it did not come from the direction they were watching. The state charged Rilla Ochiltree with 4 counts of criminal abuse of a minor, 6 counts of unlawful imprisonment, and 1 count of criminal mistreatment resulting in serious physical injury. That last one for a 15-year-old boy with permanent scarring in the lower lobe of his right lung. The federal indictment, which is the one that ended her, ran to 61 pages. Forced labor of minors, conspiracy, wire fraud on 842 donors across 31 states, and theft of program funds for $491,000 in per diem stipends billed for children who were sleeping in a barn. The forced labor count carried the weight. The government did not have to prove she owned anybody. It had to prove she obtained the labor of minors by means of a scheme intended to make them believe that if they refused, they would suffer serious harm. Jonas Quillen's notebook proved it in pencil, in his own handwriting, 309 days of it. Zebulon Ochiltree took a plea at 11 months and testified, which is what men like Zeb do when the room stops being on their side. Pastor Ira Zabel, second board member of Second Wind Equine Rescue, went down for the donation fraud and stood up in his own church one last time to say he had never known, and the congregation sat there and let him say it and did not look at him. Yancey Ulmer, the neighbor who had paid $31,000 for a crew of 4 children, was convicted of unlawful employment of minors and benefiting from forced labor, and paid restitution to every one of them. He also, to his credit, wrote each of those kids a letter, and Quaid Harkin says 2 of them read it. Sheriff Lemuel Bexley was not convicted of anything. He was defeated in the following November by 4,100 votes by a former deputy named Zadie Norwood, who had been passed over for promotion twice, and who ran on a single sentence, "I will answer the phone." Noreen Yardley, the regional placement coordinator who had closed 11 reports on that address with the same 6 words, resigned 3 days before a legislative committee could subpoena her. The law that came out of that committee is on the books in that state now. It requires that any facility receiving per diem placement funds be subject to unannounced inspection, that every child in a placement be seen in person and alone every 30 days, and that a barn, shed, or outbuilding used for sleeping be treated as a residence. People call it the Quillen Rule, which Jonas hates, because he says he didn't do anything except write things down. Kayleen Ochiltree pleaded guilty to a single count of endangering a minor and took 24 months of probation and a permanent bar on unsupervised custody. Ardin did not speak against her at sentencing, and he did not speak for her either. When the judge asked if he wished to be heard, he stood up and said, "Your Honor, my daughter is going to read this transcript when she's 20. I'd like her to find that her father told the truth and didn't enjoy it." Then he sat down. Rilla Ochiltree was sentenced to 22 years, and she never once, in 14 months, in any hearing, in any interview, in any letter, admitted that she had done a single thing wrong. In her allocution, she said she had raised 400 children out of the dirt, and that the world had gotten soft, and the judge listened to all of it and then said, "Ma'am, you have described your own case better than the government did. The farm was forfeited. And here is what Ardin Tilden did with the only thing he ever asked for. He did not want the land. He put in a claim on behalf of the 41 names, and the court appointed a trustee, and 300 acres of Vachel County ground became a working apprenticeship for kids aging out of the system, run by Dr. Farah Nasser and Quaid Harkin, with a paid wage on a real pay stub, a bunkhouse with a lock only on the inside, a school schedule, and a rule that Ardin wrote himself and that hangs by the door: nobody sleeps in a barn, ever, for any reason. The rescue was rebuilt honestly. 8 horses came back from a kill pen in Ohio, including a sway-backed bay gelding who had never once lifted his head, and every sponsor on that website now gets a photograph with a date burned into the corner of it and the animal's Coggins number printed underneath, because the man who set it up believes that trust is just verification you're willing to show. The north barn came down in October. They saved the boards. The end stall's door and back wall were cut out whole, planed flat, sealed, and hung in the bunkhouse dining room where the light hits them in the morning. All 41 names still scratched in the wood, exactly as they were left. Under each name is a small brass plate, ordered 12 at a time, the same kind that used to hang on the stalls. Each plate has a name and a date and a job title. Some of them say student, some say farrier's apprentice. One says veterinary technician, 2nd year, and that one is Jonas Quillens, who put on 41 pounds in his first year out of that stall, and who, when he speaks at the state legislature now, always begins by saying that he was not a runaway. Effie Tilden is 9. She has a room in a house her father bought outside Callaway with a hook by the door, and her boots stand upright under her coat. She asked her father about the last stall exactly once, when she was 7, and he had promised himself he'd never lie to her about it, so he told her the truth in the shortest words he had. He said that a door with a lock on the outside isn't a door, it's a cage, and that the difference between the two is not the wood, it's which side the handle's on. She thought about that for a while. Then she asked whether they'd taken the lock off the new bunkhouse, and her father told her that they hadn't put one on, and Effie said, "Good," and went back to lining up her horses, which she does now, all facing the same way, by height, because some things a person keeps. Nathan again. I want to leave you with the thing that stuck to me, and it isn't the barn. It's the 72 hours. Every system in this story worked exactly the way it was written. The caseworker followed her rules. The sheriff filed his report. The placement office closed 11 complaints with a phrase that was technically accurate every single time. Nobody in that county had to be evil for this to run for 11 years. They only had to be procedural. And the woman at the center of it understood the procedure better than the people who wrote it, which is how she survived so long. She wasn't hiding from the system. She was living inside its notice period. 3 days is enough time to make anything look like a home. The other thing I keep turning over is what actually broke it. Not outrage, not a viral post, not a confrontation on a porch, not a man with a shotgun and a grudge. What broke it was a father who understood that a horse in this country is better documented than a child, and who was patient enough and cold enough to go through the animal door because the child door was guarded. He photographed a thermometer. He kept a numbered log. He put a camera on a public easement and waited 11 days. And a 15-year-old boy in a Padlock stall did the same thing with a 99-cent notebook, which is the part I can't get out of my head, because that kid had no evidence training and no plan, and he still understood the one rule that saved him. If you can't be heard yet, be recorded. Write down the date. Somebody eventually reads it. If this one got to you, subscribe and stay a while. There's another story waiting.